Let's all take a deep breath and see what Spirit has to say to us this morning. The hardest part of doing a message for me is not and I spend quite a bit of time studying, doing notes, just kind of, several hours a week. But when I get here, the hardest part is not the notes, it's getting out of the way. And just being a clear vessel for Spirit to move through, and for Spirit to connect me to you and to you that are joining us. It's not about just what I want to say separately, but what is the Spirit saying to the community? 17 times in the last book of the Bible, it says, hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. And we've all learned through this ministry that the word church is the Greek word ekklesia. And it doesn't mean buildings. It means people. It means people who are joined by an experience, not by a belief system. That's one thing I loved when I discovered New Thought and discovered unity and the whole metaphysical community is I realized that 99.9% of those people were not raised in that. People come from Baptist, they come from Catholic, they come from all kinds of different places. I think we had one at Unity of Charlotte that was there. Yeah, Peggy. But that's rare. It's rare. Most of us are renegades. We've all come from different places. But what brought us together was not going to a theology school or learning. We had an experience of moving us from outside dogma and doctrines of mankind to something inside of ourselves. How many of you used to sit in those religious meetings and churches that you went to and grew up in and just inside felt like there's something more than this? This is just not connecting me to what they're saying. The God they're talking about is not the presence that I feel within myself. And you kind of thought, well, I can't tell anybody, my family, everybody will think I'm crazy. And then maybe you picked up a daily word or you heard about a group meeting somewhere and you thought, there is a community of people throughout the world that have been joined by an experience, not by a belief system. And that's why we're here today. Even though that we are joined together by the principles and the law of Spirit, the laws of the universe, we still have space for each and every one of us to experience our own path. And I think that's beautiful. And that's how we grow. So, I don't do this often, but I'm going to start with a joke today because I know I get heavy. So, these jokes are always a risk. That you're going to go, oh. I'm passing this on to you because it definitely works, and we could use a little more calmness in our lives. By following simple advice heard on the Oprah show, you can find inner peace. Dr. Oz proclaimed, the way to achieve inner peace is to finish all the things you have started and have never finished. So I looked around my house to see all the things I'd started that I hadn't finished. And before leaving the house this morning, I finished off a bottle of white Zinfandel, a bottle of tequila, a package of Oreos, the remainder of my old Prozac prescription, the rest of the cheesecake, some Doritos, and a box of chocolates. You have no idea how freaking good I feel right now. Oh, yeah, made it again. Made it again. In this time that we've entered into, I refer to it as the dark side of the soul. And we've talked about that here, but I'm going to talk a little bit about it again today. But I'm going to use this dark side of the soul as one of the metaphors for the tunnel of rebirth. The tunnel of rebirth. And there's several metaphors that you can use for the night of the soul, but one of them is the tunnel of darkness that we go through. And it's during this time that we have to dig deeper into our psyche, into our souls, and find those package of Doritos we didn't finish. And emotionally, the things that we have suppressed, that we did not balance into our life stream, into our Akashic records, into our karmic accounts. And trust me, nothing is ever forgotten. You may think you have forgotten what happened to you in the younger years of your life, or 20 years ago or 30 years ago, because you've suppressed it. But the imprint energetically remains there. And we know that we are not guided most of the time in our daily life by just that little bit of consciousness. Being conscious of this, being conscious of getting in the car, being conscious of that. Say you're conscious to get in your car because you're going to the store. Okay? But when you get into the car, you're not very conscious about how to drive the car because it's in your unconscious. You've learned how to do certain things that you don't even have to show up consciously for. And that is a great part of what is affecting our lives every day, is what we're not really conscious of in the moment. Consciousness is a small part of driving your life. So wouldn't it make sense for us, if we really want to be enlightened beings and to be conscious, mindful people, that we have to take care of that we have suppressed into that recesses of the soul? And that's what this whole idea of the dark side of the soul is about. It is the time for healing to take place. Now, all these things that I could talk about could be individually experienced by some and not all. But I find it interesting, the predicament that we find ourselves in, this pandemic time, political time, racial time, and all this is not something that is affecting somebody or a few people, but it seems like it has met us on a planetary level. A planetary level. And I've always loved this idea of Barbara Marx Hubbard, who taught us about, at some point there will be a planetary Pentecost. And for you who don't know what that means, Pentecost was a feast day that the Jewish people had, and it meant 50. After 50 years they would meet on Pentecost. And it was on that particular feast of Pentecost that the people went into the upper room and prayed and waited until there was a outpouring of the Spirit upon them, which is really the beginning of the ecclesia, the Christ community, what's called the body of Christ, happened at that day. And it was in that moment that there was people there from every nation that was at that time known in that part of the world. So that meant there were different cultures, there was different language, everybody had a different form that they had been formed from culture and society. But the thing that happened was, it was very much something that universally happened to everybody at the same time. And all of a sudden, it said the Spirit came like a sound out of the heavens and was poured upon these people. And it says when that happened, every person understood every other person's language. All of a sudden, the diversity and the differences of I'm not you, you're not me, was diminished and wiped away as everyone found a universal experience as they entered into the mind of God at the same time. And Barbara Marx Hubbard used to say that just as we were joined together at the assassination of JFK or Martin Luther King or 9/11 or anything else like that, that there's going to be a spiritual positive experience that's going to happen, not a negative one that's going to join us together, not out of tragedy, but out of an awakening on the collective level that's going to evolve humanity into a different and higher space called the upper room. The upper room. That's why he said, go to Jerusalem and tarry, wait in the upper room of consciousness, because they had to get them in the vibration of what was trying to come. They weren't going to get it in the lower room, but in the higher room. The Spirit found a vibration match in which it could come in and be poured upon these people. So I would like to say this is that time that there's a collective Pentecostal experience, but you got to realize before that can happen, there's got to be something that takes us into the recesses of the darkness of the soul for healing to take place. This virus, this pandemic event that is happening is allowing everything to come out of the darkness of the human collective soul. Prejudice, racism, sexism, every ism that you could name is emerging like a building up of toxicity coming forth and out of the body politic. So I'm going to talk a little about human evolution has been through many, many different rounds of transformations. But today we're living a truly remarkable time. Is it remarkable? It is remarkable. Not from a human point of view, but from a spiritual point of view. It's a remarkable opportunity that is being given to humanity to evolve collectively to the next level of what it means to be a human without a lot of the baggage. Without the baggage. So we have to go through this place. And again, I've used so much the children of Israel out there and how they wanted to leave Egypt and go into the land of milk and promise, but they didn't like that in between part of the wilderness. But it's because every one of them came out of Egypt with a war-based consciousness. And their God was saying to them, you can't enter into the new land with all that baggage. You've got to get it out of you before you enter in. So we've met our time in which we're having an opportunity to clear out the collective soul of humanity. Even though it's ironic that we're more connected than ever before. Globally, economics, internet, social media are transforming the way we interact and relate to each other on a global scale. See? Global scale. We're connected on this planet by the interact of our digital age. We're exposed to an unprecedented amount of input and stimulus. No wonder there's a lot of insomnia, one of the depression. There's so much stimulus going on in the air. In the air. Airwaves. You said, well, I don't turn my television on and watch any of that news. It's still going through your house. You just didn't put the code in and tune into it. But it says that we don't deal with flesh and blood, but powers and principalities of the air, of the airwaves. So I encourage you to take responsibility to protect yourself in the white light of the Christ presence. Not have it just in you, but you need to be in it. You know, everything we hear is in me. Christ in you, the hope of glory. The kingdom of God is within me. But are you in the Christ, or just the Christ in you? In other words, you've got to clothe yourself with the light of the Christ in the day that we live in. I would suggest that you do that every day, to put on the garment of light and protect yourself from these waves of things that are moving through that hold within them certain agendas. There's a shift that is taking place. We know that. And can we trace this process of humans' evolution to where we've come from, and where are we? And where might we be going? That's what I'm not sure about. I don't think any of us knows what it's going to look like when we get through the tunnel and come out in the light of a new world. I don't think it's a repeat of anything that has ever been. I think it's uncharted territory. I think it's systems that we have never dreamed of that are being awakened inside of all of us. And we play a part. Now, we're a part, whether we like it or not, we are identified into the religious category. If you're going to put people in boxes, anybody that meets that has spiritual ties with each other and believes a text of some kind are going to be called religious. And we like to say we're spiritual and not religious, but in culture and in society, we still call this a church. I try to call it a center most of the time if I catch myself, but if I don't, then I say Sunday church. And that's probably the religion in me that needs to be dealt with. So the beginning of this new millennium mark is an interesting time in human evolution. We entered fully into a digital age with a very rapid advances in technology. It's going really fast, isn't it? This says that so much of the science fiction of the 90s has become the science fact of today. During this time, we've also experienced increasing trends towards spiritual awakening and conscious lifestyle, such as yoga, meditation, Tai Chi. Any ancient spiritual practices have moved us from the fringes into the mainstream culture. We've seen a trend shift towards more health-conscious choices and a push for more sustainability. At the core of this shift towards coincides with the dark night of the soul. This, as I said earlier, is an important place that we must allow ourselves to go through to get to the light that awaits for each and every one of us. This is because we're seeing all the corruption, injustices, and the ugliness that happens when our societies are run by fear, prejudice, greed, and in short, we're having to face our dark side and overcome our attachments to old paradigms. We could say that the inner demons of humanity are really in our face right now. We've launched it into the collective conversation, such as racism, inequality, sexual imbalance. Before these things that were happening behind the scenes, they were covered up, but now they're being exposed and we're being confronted with what is emerging. So this is no time as a spiritual community, as a metaphysical community, to go and hide our sand and our heads into spiritual sand. It's no time to do that. It is time for us to rise to the occasion of why we have been drawn into this path of metaphysical and spirituality. You wasn't just brought in it so that you can feel better about you. This was a training that has gone on, preparing you strategically to be in the front lines of what is coming. We've called them light workers. We've called it the critical mass. We've called it the first fruits of the harvest. We've called it the ecclesia. We've called it many things, but it is those who have been prepared to stand up and take their place in this time, and who do not fear to move into the unknown of a new spirituality that is emerging upon the earth. We need to take ownership and recognize where any of this exists is truly in ourselves. This is the growing point. The growing point right here. And probably the most challenging is for us to stop projecting on things outside of us that we don't want to see in ourselves. That's the world of ego. The world of the ego is always to pervert cause and effect. And if you say and believe that God is in you, how many here believe that God is in you, the divine is in you, okay? If you believe that and know that God is first cause of everything that's ever been created, and God's in you, then you have that part of cause that lives in you. I like to say that anything the divine source is capital. We are the same thing with a little letter. I used to tell the story when I was a kid, and I said anything mean to my mother, and I called her a name. She would say to me, if you call me an ugly term, you're calling yourself because you're my son. What you call me, you're calling yourself. And I go, well, I didn't like that. But there was something to that stuck in my mind a little bit, that how we present this idea of cause and effect is very important on a spiritual level. And we've talked about that a lot. Course of Miracles is absolutely the most wonderful teaching on that I have found, of this idea of classic projection on things. And the idea is always based upon the idea that how I feel is caused by outside of myself. That if Charles does something that makes me angry, he was the cause, I'm the effect. And if I can remove him or change him, then I change how I feel. Course of Miracles says, no, the Holy Spirit system is this, that Charles has awakened in me anger that I've stored in my unconscious, whether I know I had it or not, and has offered me an opportunity to heal that anger and realize that cause is in me, right? So if I could be spiritual enough and catch myself in that moment, I might at that moment say, dear God, in this moment, heal me from any anger that has been stored in me, whether it's conscious or unconscious in me. I release it into the light. Rather than say, oh, what Charles has done to me. I was doing fine till Charles came along and said what he did or did what he did. I was doing fine till he caused me to be angry. And you got those players today that can really show you deeply what you've not healed in yourself. I think in some ways all of the emotion that's going on today politically and in other areas of our life has totally knocked us out consciously, and that we've gone into a reactive place in which we have fallen right into the ego's world in some way. And again, we need to keep reminding ourselves, be mindful of those things. I don't do it all the time, but I am doing my best to be aware of turning this back to a spiritual system rather than the ego system of projecting it out there. So nobody out there can make me feel any way that it's not already an imprint in me. And I love the story when it says about the teacher, Yeshua, Jesus, that it said when his adversary came up and tried to project its agenda upon Jesus, it said it found nothing. For it says there was nothing in me. In other words, you cannot make me angry if I don't have any anger in me. And in the place of where anger was, compassion fills that space. And that's my goal. I won't mention names, but there are those that really I would like to know what it's like to feel an inner explosion of compassion and love rather than get so upset and so angry at them. If that happens, I know I've reached a place in my spiritual growth that I want to be at. So everyone is giving us an opportunity to kind of measure ourselves to see where we are in the spiritual growth of things. We need to take ownership and recognize where any of this exists in ourselves. We need to conquer the energies within before we can change the world. How do we do that? This task may seem daunting, and when we take the approach of the alchemist, a new vision and clarity emerges. To illustrate this journey, let's compare to the metamorphosis of the caterpillar. Again. Somebody said, well, you keep saying these same things. Until I see it manifested, I'm going to keep saying it. Right? In the beginning, the caterpillar lives most of its life consuming and growing fat off the land. That's what it does. It's on a little leaf, just nibbles and eats all day long, and lives a very, very limited existence in life. Until one day. I like that. One day, something happened that was innate in the caterpillar. And some kind of an internal clock goes off. Now, the fact that they use this term makes me think that probably it went off in the part of the brain called the pineal gland. The internal clock, melatonin, sleeping cycles, night and day cycles are all in the pineal or pineal, however you want to pronounce it. Both ways are correct, actually. I prefer pineal. Goes off. And as the caterpillar reaches a certain level of maturity, are we there? Are we there? Let's have a check this morning. Are we there? Are we ready for this eternal clock to go off in us? And at this point, it's a normal function starts slowing things down. Things have slowed down, especially since March. Streets aren't near as full. Stores aren't near as full. The world has slowed down everything. And it became a struggle to carry on as usual. We are living in times that are usual times. This is an unusual time. So the caterpillar finds a nice little spot to rest and spin itself. A comfy little cocoon. And within this cocoon or chrysalis, a chemical process starts to take place. It begins with the old structure of the caterpillar breaking down and going through a form of death. I'm going to do a message here real soon on finding death before death finds you. There is a form of a death to go through that's in this story of the caterpillar. This initial breakdown relates to a stage of alchemy. It's literally digesting itself. As the caterpillar cells dissolve into a soupy mess. The world's a mess, isn't it? A soupy mess. But it takes that. That's part of the process. That's part of the system that is so important for this to happen. Then it enters into another stage of dissolution. Within society, we might compare the old form of the caterpillar to structures and institutions born out of the Industrial Revolution. Now, you that had parents and grandparents and whatever that were farmers back many years ago before the age of industry, that was seen as a threat. People thought the world was ending, who thought that the norm was in agriculture and in farming. And all of a sudden, factories started springing up in the north and Detroit and all kinds of places. It was seen as a threat to life as they knew it. Then we moved into the digital age of computers. And a lot of us of this generation went in kicking. No different. The end of the world has come. It's not like it used to be. It's always the way it is as we move forward in our evolution of things to come. These systems dominated our way of perceiving and operating for a long time, but since the new millennium, these structures are starting to crumble, and we've been shifting into a new paradigm. We see the breakdown happening within the worlds of finance, government, business, education, and so many other systems. These are all really in flux right now, and visionaries of all are literally looking for a next big disruptive idea. And you know, I'm beginning to see it. And I noticed that it seemed like it took about 9 months of gestation before people really started saying, you know, I got to get creative. If I'm going to exist in the world that I find myself today, I can't keep waiting for that job to come back. I can't keep looking for what was sustaining me to be there to hold me up again. And people more and more are getting creative in fascinating ways. They really are. It's not all about breakdown, but there's the breaking through of new ways. Tim and I like to watch the show America Got Talent, and they were just so upset because they were used to that audience, the feedback, the whatever, and all of a sudden they found themselves in this empty big place like that for a long time, and then all of a sudden they came up with this tremendous idea behind them to put hundreds and hundreds of people on Zoom behind them, walls of people. And I thought, that's creative. It's amazing. They're applauding, they're clapping, they're there digitally. Hundreds and hundreds of them are there. Churches, other places are finding creative ways to continue to stay in touch with people. I know we'd all rather be together, but you have to be creative within the frame of where you are in the process. We want to change. We want change to happen, and there's a lot of progress being made behind the scenes. But there are those who don't want change. Make America great again. We want things to stay the same. According to the old paradigm, we can compare people within society to the cells of the caterpillar. Some people think that the old structures worked just fine and it provided safety, security, and control. Everyone knew their place. I remember that time, growing up in the 50s in Oklahoma. White people had their side of town. African Americans had their side of town. Everybody had their place, their box. And there was so-called peace as long as everybody stayed in their place. Women stayed in their place of the home. And that all changed in the 60s, didn't it? Because something went off, like in that caterpillar in the 60s, something went off in women. And women said, I've got more talent and more capacity and potential that I know that I can contribute to society and culture. Other parts of our subculture, gay people, black people, brown people, any people that were put on the sidelines of society and culture begin to feel that going off in them too, until they begin to find a restlessness and a divine yearning begin to be awakened in them to move into a different place and space, to be more than they was able to be under the old paradigms. Everyone knew their place and their duty. These people tend to cling to the old structure and fight for its survival. That's what you're seeing in the streets today. On one hand, you see people who have a vision for something better. On the other hand, you see people that's there to fight, to hold on to the status quo, under the term of making it better for them, and at the expense of so many other people who continue to suffer under the old systems in that way. Then we have the people who fall somewhere in the middle, who tend to go with the status quo. Most of them, the comfort zone wins out because change requires a lot of energy. And that's true. When you realize how much energy is it going to take me to really go through this transformation of becoming a Homo sapien human to a spiritual Homo luminous human, a light human, filled of light. It's going to take some energy. It's going to take some energy to deal with your family. It's going to take some energy to deal with your neighbors. It's going to take energy to deal with society at large who are comfortable the way things were. You're going to shake up things. And the system is becoming agitated. As this breakdown happens within the caterpillar, the old cells act like they're dying, and they go into a survival mode. And this is what a lot of people think. They think they've got to go into surviving what's going on because so-and-so is going to take from us. If we allow this, they'll take over. And that's a great fear that has come up with people who don't want to go through what it takes to pay the price for transformation to take place. In the middle of this point, a new type of cell appears on the scene. Hope. That's what I want to give you today. I want to tell you about how bad it all is. I'm going to tell you how good it's going to get. And it's at the maybe the worst time. You're still in the tunnel, in the dark tunnel, thinking, is there never going to be an end to this tunnel? New cells called imaginal cells. That's what they call them, imaginal cells. And they started showing up in greater numbers, and since they're different from the old cells, they were perceived to be a threat to the system. Do you realize how many people from a far conservative, believe that people who are more liberal in their thinking are a threat to education, to children, to many things? They think we want to destroy. They think we want to go and take their guns away. That's a good one. I really think that's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. I don't know anybody who wants to take guns away. I think there needs to be certain things done with guns, some regulations, but I don't think anybody's ready to go and start taking guns out of people's houses. It's a little bizarre, isn't it, when you look at it? We're not a threat to the system. The old cells think that the imaginal cells are like a virus. And so they attack and try to kill them off. This is where the cells enter into what we call the place of extremes. We're living this one, a day of extremities. The imaginal cells need to separate out from the old cells in order to survive. Fortunately, at this point, the caterpillar's DNA has shifted as expression and put out new instructions to create more imaginal cells than the cells that are dying of the caterpillar. They're part of a blueprint as they were from the beginning, and as more and more come into the scene, they start grouping together, a new ecclesia, a new group, a new pod, gaining strength in numbers, and at some point the imaginal cells reach a critical mass. They realize that they don't have to do everything on their own. They can start to spatialize, create new forms and structures. The structures are guided by clear vision within the DNA blueprint. And soon the form of the butterfly starts taking shape. This brings us to the conjunction stage of the alchemy process. The imaginal cells unite around the new common vision. and the old caterpillar cells still cling to the old crumbling systems. And at that point start noticing something new is happening. They see that something going on with those imaginal cells seems to be working, and then some of the caterpillar cells start to shift and join the new system. Wow. Caterpillar cells assume that the tasks that they were designed to do within the new structure, new instructions. This frees up the imaginal cells now to specialize even further. And this, and I gotta quit. And brings us to the fermentation stage of alchemy. It's part of the maturing of the new form and a death to the old. To ferment something means to allow it to mature to the point where anything that is corruptible rots away. Now, this is important that you realize, because there's not a one of us in our reactive system that doesn't want to say, I'd like to stop all this. I've had enough of this. This is not fun anymore. And I'm hearing some things that this could go on for another year. That most likely this will not change until next winter, 2021 or something like that. That's not good news to a part of me. I'm ready for it to be over and get back to my life. But if this would do that, the butterfly would not exist. It takes the entire process to strengthen this butterfly that was once caterpillar cells to become strong enough to survive and get out of the cocoon. So it doesn't want to get out of the cocoon too soon. And we've got in ourselves to make some kind of peace. And the only way to do that is to trust. Trust the universe. Trust God. Trust the fact that there is a plan and a purpose that is working. We will do no service for ourselves or for each other if we continue to fight against the process of this important transformation that is taking on. And in this stage, we're forced to go deeper and address some of the core structures that we talked about earlier. Metaphysical meaning of the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel is the end of a difficult situation. This term light at the end of the tunnel is metaphoric expression that started in the 1800s and was widespread by the mid-1900s. Most primal meanings is symbolized by the birth canal, in which the fetus grows to a point where it must enter into the birth canal where the light of its new world draws it. Wow. Isn't that beautiful? Most primal meanings, I'm going to read it again, is symbolized by the birth canal, in which the fetus grows to a point where it must enter into the birth canal where the light of its new world draws it. And I'll close with a couple of scriptures I want to give you. Romans 12:2. Be not conformed to this world. And this word world is aeon, or a period of time. Remember, this is a period of time. It's not forever. But it is a period of time that has been set aside for us. And I do not believe that you're living this by accident. I think you were prepared before you ever incarnated into this lifetime for this time, because it says that God will not put more on you than you can bear. Don't you ever think that when you come to the end, you're about to lose something that you cannot draw from the wells of your spirit. Even when you thirst, you will drink. When you're hungry, you will eat of the bread which cometh down from heaven. But be ye transformed, which is the Greek word metamorphos, by the renewing of your mind, which is in Greek gnosis, or understanding, that you may prove the will of God that is good, acceptable, and perfect. And the word perfect in Greek means having reached the end. Galatians 6:9 says, let us not grow weary. This is one of the best ones I want to give you today. Let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap, if we faint not. The Mirror Bible says it even better. Every good deed has a predictable harvest. Let's not get discouraged in the in-between times. Yes, we've left a world almost 9 months ago, a year ago, and we've entered into an in-between world that we've not arrived quite at the world that is trying to emerge. So realize that Spirit is there to help each and every one of us to keep the peace and the strength and the vision and the joy until we make it to the end of the tunnel and into the new light of a new kingdom and a new world. I haven't told you anything today that is that different from my message has always been. This message has always been with me since the late 80s. The message that I've over and over preached, that crisis precedes transformation. That breakdown of molecules have to break down before they're reorganized into higher states. But you know, it was easy to preach that when we weren't living that. We're living it today. So I say to this spiritual community, not just Heartlight, but the community of those who are following the spiritual path today, to be encouraged and realize that your resource may not be out there right now, but has not replenished the inner resources of that kingdom, that space that holds the divine presence within you and wants to become as you to the world today. Let us pray. Holy Spirit, please, please speak to the hearts and the spirits of those today. Anywhere that I have failed to express it, any place that I have failed to have the right word, may you fill in with your wonderful, still, small voice, whispering a subtle, gentle breeze through the recesses of our mind and our soul. Renew the vision. Renew the hope. Renew the purpose for which we talked about many, many years before this time that we're living. Open the windows of heaven and pour out your Spirit. Blessings that we have never, ever comprehended that is ours today in this time. We ask this in the wonderful name and nature of the Christ consciousness that is awakening more and more within the human mind. And so it is. Amen. All right.